That's sad.
Hurts you. Bam, guys. We are live. It is Joey Ice, John Oney. It's
Yes, sir.
With the Beware of D-Ware shirt. Looking fantastic. And before we get into training camp, we got some rough news. We spent 15 minutes bragging about how great the Cowboys beat was on Tuesday, and then Thursday morning we got some rough news. Our guy, who's one of our favorite beat writers, who does one of the best jobs in the group, or has done one of the best jobs in the group over the last few years, Mike Gehlken, has announced that he's leaving the Dallas Morning News and moving to DC with his family, which as somebody who has a bunch of kids running around, and family is really important to me. I live very close to my family, so I completely understand it for sure.
Yeah, totally understand and respect Michael's decision to move his family from Dallas back home to Washington, D.C. Surprising to me that he doesn't already have a gig lined up there. Seems like he's just kind of moving there and hoping somebody picks him up. I mean, I'm not sure of all the Commanders beat jobs out there, but I don't see why a Washington Post or something like that wouldn't hire him immediately, because he would immediately upgrade their Commanders coverage, and the Commanders beat as a whole, would be upgraded almost immediately, because Gehlken is the class of the beat reporter across the NFL. If you go back, I mean, go ask Raiders fans, go ask Chargers fans when he covered them. He rose to the top of the quote unquote beat reporter rankings of those beats extremely quickly. He did the same thing with the Cowboys. He was incredibly helpful to me behind the scenes. He would help me, give me resources, give me contact information for things that I needed for projects that I was working on. He was just not only a phenomenal beat reporter, a great human, a fantastic resource, and I'm going to incredibly miss him as part of the Cowboys. In fact, he's such a good beat reporter. I'm going to follow Commanders beat a little bit now, because I ain't unfollowing Michael. He's just that good of his job, that good at his job, so.
Yeah, this feels like a classic. This feels like a classic. 2 weeks from now, there's a "This is why I joined the Athletic" post from Michael Gehlken, where he moves to Washington, and the Athletic is like, "This guy is too good for us to not just add him to the beat in Washington. He's too good. The coverage will be too good. It's just too good of another resource on a team that has been largely irrelevant for most of the last couple of decades, but under new leadership, head coach, new quarterback, new ownership, new GM, all that kind of stuff, brand new. Put a really high quality beat reporter on that beat, and you have the opportunity to have the best coverage in the country for that specific organization, as there is a potential, hopefully for Cowboys fans it doesn't happen, but as there is the potential for a rise from the ashes for this organization, for that organization, over the course of the next few years. So,
and make sure you guys gas up, Michael. This is a really tough time to get hired. Most media budgets are already set. Looking forward to the next season, and most places don't really have the budget set to add someone of Michael Gehlken's caliber. But I think he's good enough that you adjust the budget. So
yeah, as a couple of guys who've done some freelancing and some contract writing through football seasons, around this time of year, that stuff has usually already been established or is being established. And so, like you said, it is an interesting time of year for this kind of move. But the thing is that, like, we don't know, Michael a lot better than I do, right? Having with the time at the Dallas Morning News together. But it's hard to imagine somebody as good at his job as Mike is, just making this jump without having a plan for what the future holds, even if maybe it's not something finalized that he can discuss publicly yet, at least. Because, like you said, he's too good.
Gassing him up online, make sure that if anybody's hiring, they see the overwhelming amount of support he gets, and that kind of shows them that this is a guy that we need to hire, or this is a guy that we need to finalize our contract negotiations with, what have it be. So just unfortunate day for the Cowboys beat, but we press on.
Yeah, absolutely. It's that stuff in public, in the public support, it matters in these conversations. It matters for perception from publishers and from outlets towards writers and podcast hosts and things like that. The way they are viewed in the general public of the fan base definitely matters to those guys. So make sure, like John said, gas him up. Post the hire Gehlken post on X on Twitter, and support him in that way until we have the opportunity to support him by reading his work from somewhere else.
Totally.
All right, as we transition to talking about the Cowboys football, we are now 1 week. Today's the 18th. We are 1 week from the Cowboys' first training camp activity on the field. I hesitate to call it a practice, but there will be football-related activities on the fields in Oxnard in a week. We will be on our Thursday show that week. We will probably be talking a lot about whatever, as I said the other day, whatever nature metaphor Jerry Jones made in the opening press conference the day before. But there will be football practice happening on next Thursday in Oxnard. We talked about the offense a lot. We had a really fun conversation on Tuesday about the offense and about some specific players, Terrence Steele, Tyler Guyton, and some other guys really stepping up this year is going to make a big difference, not only from their specific position, but from the offensive structure and coordination as a whole. So let's move to the defensive side of the ball. We talked about a few storylines on defense, but what storylines on defense are you looking for over the course of that first couple of weeks of training camp before you get there? And then once you get there, what are you going to be watching for? Obviously as a trench play guy, you're going to be in the trenches a lot. What are you looking for as you prepare to go to camp and then as you get there?
Oh, there's tons. I think defense is where you see the real wealth of storylines going into camp, given that Mike Zimmer's first season as defensive coordinator, given, Trevon Diggs coming off the ACL, the Mozzie Smith weight issues, the scheme as a whole, the, DeMarvion Overshown injury stuff. I would say before I get there, the stuff I want to hear about is how is guys like Trevon Diggs, DeMarvion Overshown, how are they moving around?
Yeah.
How is Mozzie Smith? Is he back from his shoulder yet, or is he still kind of taking it easy? How does he look just from a movement perspective?
Yep.
Those type of things. So those are, I would say before I get there, those are kind of the main tenets that I want to see. And then when I get there, I'm going to be looking for, scheme related things. Where are the defensive tackles lined up? Are they lining up full man? They're lining up half man? They playing with gap and a half responsibilities? They playing two gap, traditional two gap, or are they going back to half a man, one gap? Or is there going to be different positions doing different things? Is it going to be like the right defensive end's a one gapper? Is the left defensive end more of a two gap or a gap and a half? Is Mozzie going to be nose tackle? Is he going to be playing gap and a half or two gap? Those type of things I'm going to be looking forward to. And then another thing I'm going to be looking for is what kind of personnel packages are they going to be using? Because with Dan Quinn, they were all sub package, whether it was nickel or dime or big nickel, what have you be. They never played base. They were I think they might have been the lowest team in base personnel usage during Dan Quinn's tenure. And a lot of things we've heard from Mike Zimmer is he's going to bring the looks back of three linebackers on the field. There's going to be a lot more, there's going to be a lot more equating personnel with the offense. When the offense goes 12, 21, 13 personnel, you're going to see the Cowboys use their base personnel so that they can have kind of a beef on beef. So I'm kind of excited to see how that manifests itself from an alignment and a personnel perspective. So I would say those are kind of things I'll be looking for before. And then when I get there, that's what I'll be looking for.
Yeah. One of the things that will be interesting that I don't know necessarily how well the guys on the beat will cover this specific stuff, but I know guys like you and Landon and guys who are there to watch for this kind of stuff. But like with Mozzie, right, with the shoulder, like when he takes a sled, like what does the sled sound like? Mm-hmm. Because like if he's pulling a punch with that shoulder, it's not going to sound the same as like with a dude as big and as strong as Mozzie was when he was drafted, at least. Like there's a unique way that a blocking sled reacts whenever a guy that big and that strong takes it on.
And with his hip explosion, I mean, that was one of the biggest things at Michigan. Remember, they talked about him jumping up those stairs as quickly as everybody. That's all hip explosion. And that's what you see manifested when you see someone banging into a sled.
Exactly. And so is he given that sled all it can handle, which a guy at his size with his hip explosion and athleticism and strength should, or does it feel like he's pulling punches? Does it feel like he's kind of like not sure about getting that real explosion, putting all that? Because what winds up happening is you get all that explosion, your arms go out, hands over your eyes, like Justice Mosqueda used to say all the time. You wind up having to stack your shoulder on top of your hips, on top of your knees, and your hands have to be, you wind up at an angle, but with your hands above your eyes, it puts a big burden on this shoulder to stay stacked and stay locked. If he doesn't have faith in that shoulder, if he doesn't have belief in that shoulder, he's not going to give that even that dummy, he's not going to give it all it can take. And if he's not going to give the dummy all it can take, he's not going to be able to do what he needs to do from a taking on block standpoint and eating things up to make things easier for the linebackers and make plays in the backfield and stuff like that.
So, and that's why you see defensive linemen have so much shoulder issues throughout the league. It's not, a lot of people think it's because just the blunt force of using your shoulder and tackling. It's mostly for that stacking position because you're getting so much force pushed back into your shoulder. If you're not completely correct there and your technique's not good, or say you have a deficiency in your shoulder because it was already hurting a little bit, that's where the injury issues happen. And that's why you see with these the type of injuries with Mozzie, they don't get it fixed during the season. They just kind of deal with it. And then after the season is when they get the surgery because of these type of things that aren't like, oh, I tackled the running back and hit my shoulder and then I caused an issue. It's like a repeated use type of thing.
Yeah, it's not a collarbone where it's an impact injury. It's almost like if you injure yourself and then you're lifting weights, right? If you're benching with a shoulder that hurts, it hurts, right? Like, and you're not going to be able to bench as much as you normally would. Same thing with like an incline press or a shoulder press or something like that. You're not going to be able to, those shoulders, the muscles within the shoulder are so important for that extension and that strength and stability in those extended positions that if you don't have that, you're just kind of like, you're not in a really good position. You're not in a great spot to be able to handle not even necessarily the impact, but just the strain that it takes for Mozzie take 300-pound men and hold one of them up with one arm and the other one up with the other arm and not give ground like you got to do, or to be able to hold one of them up and make yourself skinny to be able to break down the double team if they're coming at you that way. So a lot will be seen from stuff like that. And the same thing with, you mentioned Trayvon Diggs. Like, how is he moving? Because if he's is his gait, does he look beautiful? Does it look like he looked pre-injury? Or is this another one of those situations we've had the last couple of years? And DeMarvion Overshown's a similar story. Does he look the way he looked before the injury? Or does he look like he's close to where he was before the injury, but not quite there and he's going to need some more time? Because the difference between those two is the difference between Terrence Steele, Michael Gallup seasons post ACL, and
Jabril
Cox, or even the good side of it, like Jabril Cox is the worst case scenario. Michael Gallup, Terrence Steele is kind of in the middle, where it's like they're capable of being on the field, but they're not plus players anymore. And then like a full, really good recovery in a year is, I can't think of the perfect
Adrian
example.
Peterson.
Yeah, I was going to say Adrian Peterson, but that's even that's Wolverine level stuff. Right? But yeah, that's the extreme end of that is if you come all the way back from that ACL, you can be your former self. But if you aren't all the way back, you wind up kind of being a shell of yourself. And that's two positions, linebacker and outside corner, that the Cowboys can't really afford right now for one of their starting level players to be able to be who they are supposed to be. If they're not at that level, that's a rough couple of positions for the Cowboys specifically to lose some of that top of the depth chart level quality.
Yeah, totally 100% agree. Just that Jabril Cox thing really is sticking on my head and makes me really worried because I was so excited about what Jabril Cox could bring to this defense, and especially with his coverage ability. And then he just was not the same guy coming off that torn ACL. Now, of course, Jabril Cox came into the NFL with a little bit more injury issues than DeMarvion Overshown did. So I don't think Overshown has quite the history of injuries. I may be forgetting something. Somebody let me know if I did, but I'm just worried. And it's one of those things, like when I see it, then I'll be excited. But until then, I'm going to be a little bit more cautious with my viewpoint of what Overshown can contribute this year.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think it will take long to know where on that scale those guys fall. But if they fall on that, hey, they're not quite all the way back, then it becomes a question of, are they 2 months from being all the way back, and by October they're good to go and we're fine with those guys, or is it, hey, they're a year from being all the way back and we really need to have a talk about whether they're ready to be full-time starters on this team. Now, Trevon Diggs is going to be a full-time starter regardless because he's getting paid so much money. He's capable of being on the field. He's going to be on the field. But a guy like Overshown, like if he's not all the way back, do they force him into the lineup because he's a second-year, third-round pick? They didn't do that with guys like Jabril Cox, and they haven't done that necessarily in the past with those guys coming back from injury. But there's not the money part of it with Overshown the way there is with Diggs. So scheme-wise, up front, you talked a lot about, and this is the really interesting stuff, is what are the differences between what Dan Quinn was doing with how his defensive linemen are playing? Are they playing, like you talked about, are they playing full man? Are they playing head up on an offensive lineman and taking on the entire man and attempting to control both gaps on either side of them, or the gap on either side of them plus, half the gap with the man and all that kind of stuff? Or are they really truly playing a hat and crack? Are they playing the gap, one single gap between the two guys? I think it'll probably be a little bit of a mix of both. I think some of the edge guys will be playing one because, just to be frank, you don't want Micah Parsons head up on a tackle trying to extend and peek and read and all that kind of stuff. Like, that's not what you want out of Micah Parsons. But that may also be why you see Micah Parsons play some Sam and play wide against the tight end rather than playing a defensive end that may be head up on a tackle in some of the looks if they're playing kind of over front type stuff where that guy's on the line of scrimmage. So that stuff up front for sure is a big storyline from a scheme standpoint. And then I talked about it a little bit on Tuesday. I'm really interested to see what they do from a coverage menu standpoint. And it may be, again, we respect the Cowboys beat so much. Mm-hmm. But one thing that the Cowboys beat doesn't have is the guy who really, really understands scheme really well and can see a drill. And I don't think very many beats, if any, have guys that cover the team on a day-to-day basis. And part of this is, there's a whole conversation to be had about the Cowboys' willingness or unwillingness to provide media credentials to people from non-traditional media outlets. Mm-hmm. Some of these teams do, like, I'm 99% sure Joe Goodberry has a media credential for the Bengals to go to practice and stuff like that. That guy understands football at a way deeper level than most guys who just cover a team on a day-to-day basis, and other guys like that.
I mean, and honestly, that's the way it kind of should be when you look at like what the job responsibilities of a reporter are. Why do they need no coverage? They need to be able to write good stories. They need to be able to find inside information, these type of things, and be able to do all of that really well and be scheme knowledgeable. Unless you have a former experience as an NFL player, NFL coach, or something like that, that's just something that's not going to happen because you're going to put your effort into these other things that actually do like earn you more money, and they do earn you more acclaim as a beat reporter. No one's besides like the 10 of us who care,
right.
The general fans aren't going to be like, this guy's so good. He knows the difference between a Tampa 2 and a cover 3.
Yeah, he knows the backside coverage responsibility and the run fit for a quarter safety. Nobody but, like you said, the 10 of us that are real big nerds about this stuff really care to that level. And so, but it'll be hard to pick some of that stuff up in practice until guys like you and Landon, who are nerds like us, care about seeing this stuff. It's like, we've talked several times. This team has, for the last few years, been essentially a cover one team, like 60% of the time. I don't remember the exact numbers, but a massive amount of the time they've been a cover one team. Deep middle of the field safety, everybody else playing man coverage with some, depending on what the pressure look is. There's a rat player in the middle of the field down near the line of scrimmage also, or a spy or an extra pressure player. That 11th player kind of becomes a chess piece in the cover one world. Or they played a lot of cover 3. Dan Quinn comes from the Seattle background, like everybody knows what that cover 3 looks like. And then they played some. One thing I will give Dan Quinn a lot of credit for, they played some really, really creative cover 2 Tampa variations And they did a really good job of disguising when they were going to be in Tampa and when they were going to be in man, because he knew their reputation for being in man. And so he would use that to cover up opportunities for him to play, just traditional country Tampa too, but have guys playing in different spots to give the quarterback a man read pre-snap and then play Tampa. They would do things like, a lot of times you will see, we'll get a little nerdy about scheme here. You will see a running back line up wide all the way to the sideline as a wide receiver. And the offense will look to see which player goes out there with the running back. If it's a cornerback that goes out there and the outside corner widens out, the offense is automatically going to think, okay, we're seeing some version of zone coverage, because that outside corner has the outside responsibility regardless of what player it is. So then we can look at the structure in the middle of the field and we can say, okay, based on the fact that there's, two deep safeties, the cornerbacks are rolled up and the outside corner went outside with my running back, I'm pretty sure I'm getting some sort of Tampa, some sort of cloud coverage because of the fact the corners are down and we've got two safeties back. If the corners are back, but that happens, now we're probably getting some sort of quarters look or some sort of seat Tampa or something like that. So it gives the quarterback an idea pre-snap. That's what the offense is trying to do. It's the same thing with motion. How does the guy move? How does the guy move with what defender moves with a guy when he goes in motion? All that stuff trying to give the offense a pre-snap tell on what the coverage might be. Give the quarterback, because if you can take for your quarterback, if you could say, okay, it's not man coverage before the snap, that eliminates like some of your plays that you're going to run pre-snap. Like, okay, we can't run drag here.
And as you know, like what JT O'Sullivan talks about in the QB school, a lot of these offenses are a pick a side. If you
exactly.
You get a zone identifier, you're going to throw it this side. If you get a man, you're going to throw it left. So if you know it's not man, you could just know, all right, I'm not going to look to these guys to the left because those routes aren't going to work against this coverage. The coverage exploiting routes are going to be these ones on the right, and that just allows them to play quicker, make better decisions, and we've seen how that manifests itself on game day, and that leads to a much better QB play.
Exactly. And so that if-then scenario keeps the quarterback, one of the things that Dak is maybe the best in the league at right now is the pre-snap stuff at the line of scrimmage, in terms of, hey, this is what I'm seeing from the defense. This is what we need to be in. These are the routes we need to be running. This is where my protection needs to go. He's one of the few guys in the league right now that's capable of doing all of that stuff at the line of scrimmage. Like I've heard, I think JT said it. I've heard Nate Tice say it. I've heard a bunch of guys say the closest thing we have playing in the league right now to Peyton Manning stylistically is Dak Prescott, whether people want to believe it or not. Like that's stylistically in terms of at the line of scrimmage, full control of the offense, full menu of the playbook at the line of scrimmage to call and run is Dak Prescott right now in terms of what he's doing. And so a lot of people don't want to think about that or look at things that way because of how they feel about Dak and the results and all that kind of stuff. But he's incredible at that kind of stuff. It's one of his biggest strengths. A lot of quarterbacks in the league, they're not there yet. I mean, think about it. Dak's in year 8 or 9 going right now. He's 31, almost 31 years old. Like he's got a lot of experience. He's seen a lot. A lot of these quarterbacks that are playing now, they're so young, they don't. And so giving them the answer to the test of, okay, I don't need you to change the play if it's man coverage and know what play to change to and all that kind of stuff. I just need you to know that if it's man coverage, you look this way. And if it's zone coverage, you look this way. And if it's man coverage, you read, 1 to 2 to 3 over here. If it's zone coverage, you read 1 to 2 to 3 over here. This is always your check down in the middle of the field. Like this is how we play. It gives the quarterback the answers to the test. And if you can give them that answer before the snap of like, I don't care if it's cover 2 or quarters or cover 3, you're going to this side if it's some version of zone coverage. And you can give them that man zone read pre-snap for an offense, you make his life way easier. He no longer has to even think about that other side. So if you give him half the field to look at, a lot of these guys get way better. And so the
Jared Goff corollary.
Yes, exactly. If you give him the answer pre-snap, you make his life way easier. You can make a quarterback look way better than he would be capable of looking in like a standard environment by giving him that answer. And yes, Fisher, you're absolutely right. Nate talked about this for sure, is that one of the reasons why Peyton Manning never played with a ton of motion. Aaron Rodgers has been very, vocal about not loving a lot of motion pre-snap, is because the quarterback wants to get a look pre-snap and make his adjustment, and do that pre-snap, because those veteran quarterbacks want to get into the perfect play. Mm-hmm. They want to say, okay, this is we know we're seeing cover two. We're going to run a deep corner and a little short end underneath it, and we're going to high-low this outside corner who's in this Tampa responsibility over there. We know we're going to have an open player in that concept. So that's what we want to get to. Versus a lot of these
to identify tendencies as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
The thing is, you give them the same picture pre-snap every time, you're going to start picking up on the tendencies that they have when they play certain coverages. It's like when that outside cornerback is going to bail to cover three, he has like a 30-degree turn instead of being like a 15-degree turn. His
Absolutely.
eyes are looking here instead of looking there. Those are the types of things that I remember when Peyton Manning would do his detailed series on ESPN Plus, which is one of the best football-related content series that there's ever been. He would always talk about that when he was talking about why he didn't like motion, is because he would be able to pick on those little tiny details that on film you can't really see, because you can't see exactly where their eyes are looking.
Mm-hmm.
You can't see exactly how their body is positioned or who they're talking to, or you can't get that feel for those differences in depth between like a half a yard to a yard and those type of things. And that is why he loved static formations so much.
Yep.
But I think in today's NFL, that is, you may lose out on that ability to identify those tendencies, but your ability to create confusion in the defense, I think, leads to more production than it would be you picking up on those tendencies, unless you are, the Peyton Manning, like the elite of the elite of the elite. And while Dak Prescott, I think, is elite of today's NFL, he's not quite in that Peyton Manning stratosphere. So I do think that even though he may personally want more static so he can just be more comfortable with what he's seeing from the defenses, I like that ability to create that confusion, to create those big plays using motion and what have you. Sorry for interrupting.
No, you're good. And the thing is, we don't necessarily know if Dak prefers that static look, because the cool thing that this team has done last year is they let the quarterback call the plays in the last preseason game. Mm-hmm. So like the thing that's hard is like, okay, is this a peek into what his ideal version of a game plan looks like, and an ideal version of scheme and all that kind of stuff and play sequencing looks like? Because it was a freaking thing of beauty, man. Tons of motion, shifts, stuff moving around, crossing routes all over the place, quarterback constantly on the move, all that kind of stuff. Or was he calling plays to put Will Grier in a position to succeed because it's Will Grier, versus what he would want to have called for him if he was the offensive coordinator? So it's hard to know that, but one thing we do know is that when he gets to call plays at the line of scrimmage and they get in these 2-minute and no huddle situations, he is a monster. Like, he's a giant slayer in those sort of situations. So I will trust that Dak knows what he's doing from an offensive standpoint.
It's a great point you made too about how the QB's preferences play such a big part in the offense. I think we ascribe all of the value of the scheme on offense to Mike McCarthy and Brian Schottenheimer, but Dak Prescott plays a big part. I know for a fact that the reason why through 3 offensive coordinators there's been such a heavy dose of the stop routes, the comeback routes, the routes where the receiver is presenting a target stationary to his QBs, because Dak really likes those throws, especially early in games, because they allow him to get into a rhythm.
Yep.
How much of a rhythm passer Dak Prescott is. So he's been someone who's constantly fought to keep those plays in the playbook because he just feels so comfortable doing them. Now, is that because they're his best route, or is it just because Jason Garrett kind of pounded that into his head when he was a young quarterback, and that was such a big part of the offense back then? Who knows? But he's grown to the point that he really values having those type of plays in the playbook. And I know how a lot of people like us have kind of hated how that is.
That is one of the aspects that we complain about, for sure, for sure. And one of the best illustrations of what we're talking about from a quarterback having. I love how we started talking about defense, but I'm going to move to how it impacts the offense. I'm a big offense guy, but the best illustration I can think of off the top of my head of the quarterback's impact on what the scheme looks like is the Los Angeles Rams when they transition from Jared Goff playing quarterback to when they had Matt Stafford playing quarterback.
100%.
And they went from a young quarterback who relatively consistently was like, hey, if you give this guy the answers to the test before the snap and you let him stand in a relatively clean pocket and throw the ball, he's going to throw a beautiful ball. It's going to be very catchable, and you're going to move the ball very well.
And literally give them the answers. Literally.
Exactly.
In the headset. I remember I forget, it might have been Justice who did like a full like film look about what Jared Goff's like passer rating or QBR was on plays where he was able, or Sean McVay was able to give him the whatever by the 15-second when the thing was shut off. And where he wasn't able to do that because it was changing or something.
Yep.
It was such a stark difference. It was hilarious almost.
Yeah. And then you transition to Matt Stafford, who's a veteran quarterback, been around the league for a long time, played a ton of systems, seen all kinds of defenses, seen defenses evolve. And what do the Rams do? They turn into this empty, like shotgun, deep drop, downfield shot play defense, where the quarterback is literally like, all right, I'm going to get the picture. We're not going to use as much motion and stuff like that in these passing situations. I'm going to get the picture. I'm going to sit back and I'm going to throw BBs to these wide receivers, and we're going to make huge plays that way. And so, like, yes, and that's a credit to Sean McVay of not being like so set in what you're going to do that you're going to do your pre-snap motion under center play action outside zone passing game no matter what. And outside zone, because that's really a part of the passing game, not the running game, because the running game doesn't matter. But anyway, but yeah, he's going to be that, and then Matt Stafford comes in and he's a completely different offense. And then Matt Stafford comes back last year and they're another completely different offense. They married these worlds together. They're more of a duo world in the running game with lots of play action. But then when they get in these high leverage passing situations, boom, there they go out and empty, and Matt Stafford's back there. And they're a good team again all of a sudden when nobody expected them to be, because that quarterback and offensive coordinator combination is deadly because of what the quarterback is capable of doing and the menu that opens up for the offensive coordinator. And so if the quarterback can't get that answer pre-snap, all the way back to our Dan Quinn conversation, if you line up and you put the running back goes wide and the linebacker runs out wide with him and the cornerback comes inside, the quarterback is automatically going to think, okay, this is man coverage. And then if you motion that guy back in and the linebacker comes running in, he's really going to think it's man coverage. But the Cowboys several times had Leighton Vander Esch line up at the boundary against a running back or a tight end, and then they would play Tampa, where he's playing the outside flat responsibility, and the outside corner, Trayvon Diggs, is playing the hook curl responsibility instead of playing, what he would traditionally play outside. And so being able to move those pieces around was something really creative that Dan Quinn did. I think we're going to see that creativity, that different guys in different places doing different things, playing a lot more with this Mike Zimmer defense. And the thing that we're probably not going to really get to see, and maybe we will, when you're there and stuff like that, is when they get in like third down situations and when they get in 2-minute situations, like Zimmer is maybe the best third down defensive coordinator. Like Bill Belichick's like in a whole nother realm of defensive coordinator, right? Like
he ain't here. Right. He's over there hanging out on Inside the NFL on the CW or whatever the hell that is.
Zimmer's probably the best third down defensive coordinator in the league. He may be one of the top 2 or 3 in the history of the league in terms of like just making offenses' lives miserable on third downs with the looks, with the simulated pressures. If you don't know what a simulated pressure is, we're going to talk about that a lot this year, I have a feeling. A simulated pressure is where 4 guys rush like a traditional pressure, like a traditional defense, but it's not your traditional 4-man rush. So it's not the 4-man down defensive lineman rushing. It's 4 players rushing, but usually it's a linebacker rushing and a defensive lineman dropping. And so it's a simulated pressure because you show before the snap like more than those 4 guys are coming, but you only bring 4, and you can bring any 4. So it winds up creating 4 against 2 matchups on one side of the line of scrimmage, and you get free rushers and stuff like that.
How irritated are we going to be when week 1, everybody's going to be calling those plays a blitz? Everybody's going to be like, oh, the Zimmer's blitzing all the time.
Yeah. It's like,
going to be like, this isn't a blitz. It's a simulated pressure. It's still only 4 coming. And I'm going to feel like such an idiot having to explain it to 17 different people.
we'll spend a lot of time on early season Tuesday shows with the all 22 pulled up saying, look, these are the 4 guys that are coming. There's only 4 guys coming. This guy drops. That means it's not a blitz. It's a simulated pressure designed to create confusion for the quarterback. Again, take away the answers for the quarterback before the snap. Because again, if the quarterback knows where the pressure is coming from, this is something JT does a great job talking about on his channel, and something we'll talk about when we get into games in the regular season, is that the quarterback has a responsibility in the protection. And so if you can fool that quarterback's responsibility, either by making him think he's solid somewhere and then creating a free runner to that side, or making him think he's got a free runner coming from one side and then that guy goes, you can create either a hurry for the quarterback or extra patience in the quarterback. And then you can get to him, or you can create confusion in the coverage situation. And yes, Fisher, Mike McDonald is a sim pressure man as well. They are kind of the meta of the NFL right now in terms of how are we getting pressure on the quarterback without making ourselves super susceptible on the back end to big plays. It's the simulated pressure game. Is how
McDonald is definitely on the cutting edge of NFL defensive scheme, just football defensive scheme, really, because you'll see in college people were really mimicking what he does. I know a lot of high school coaches mimic what he does, and in the NFL, we saw the success that he's had immediately.
But because a lot of that stuff all comes through the Michigan-Baltimore connection because of the Harbaughs the last few years. Like those two groups kind of intermingled, and the defenses were very similar, especially once Wink left Baltimore. They kind of went to this more Michigan style of defense. And we've talked a lot about drafted Michigan defensive players and how well that turns out for a lot of teams. But this style of defense absolutely translates to the NFL level. And all the way down to the high school level, and like you said, all the way across, because there are those threads that run through that they are absolutely on the edge of what you're doing defensively in terms of moving guys around and simulated pressures and all that stuff.
Yeah. And kind of piggybacking off of what you say, the fact that Zimmer is implementing these kind of quote unquote complicated schemes, I think that kind of goes into why I wouldn't be surprised if the Cowboys defense kind of has a slower start than expected. Like Zimmer has had each time he started with a new defense. It's kind of been a slow start because these are very complicated defenses. I mean, another example, you see this with Fangio defenses everywhere he goes. He kind of is the first half of the season. Everybody's like, Fangio, such a, defensive genius. Where is it? And then you see that last half where they kind of really buy into this scheme. It's really becomes second nature to the defensive players because it is very complicated. There's so many checks, especially like you said on third down. It gets so complicated. The coverages can be so different. I mean, he's the king of mixing coverages, of playing man one side, zone the other side, playing these cover 7, Saban-esque mixes, things. He loves to get really, really, really funky on third down. And that type of thing, it's fantastic to have, but it is tough to learn and it does take time, especially when you're coming from Dan Quinn. What does everybody say about Dan Quinn? He has one of the most simplistic schemes in the NFL, and that allows his guys to play fast.
Just line up and play fast, go hunt is all they're doing. And I think it's – go ahead. Sorry, I cut you off.
You had a good point.
I think that there's a reason why on the defensive side of the ball, some of these guys who were free agents for the Cowboys were not retained, who were big, important players in a Dan Quinn –
search their name, huh?
I'm not going to say the word Beetlejuice because I don't want them to show up, but there are reasons why some of these players who were with the Cowboys, who were prominent players, and obviously, just to be clear, I will name one player. I'm not talking about Stephon Gilmore. Like, he has played in every imaginable defensive scheme there is. He's capable of playing any defensive scheme. I think the Cowboys are purposefully looking at being younger on the secondary.
I think it's more of an age thing than
it's an age
thing or a mental thing. Because I think Gilmore, in my opinion, he's probably one of the 3 smartest corners.
Exactly. That's why I wanted to make sure that he's the exception to that rule that I'm talking about. Of some of these defensive players that were here that were not prioritized to come back. And to be honest, I don't know if some of them are anywhere in the league right now. Going into the year, and they were playing 1,000 snaps for the Cowboys on defense the last few years, and you wonder why these teams were able to figure out and really easily isolate what the Cowboys were doing and all this other kind of stuff. Sometimes it's not all the coach's fault. Sometimes they're dealing within constraints of what they've got from a player standpoint. But the Cowboys are going to have to be very smart in the back seven this year for sure to handle the coverage stuff. And so it's going to be very interesting to see. And this is something that hopefully the beat guys will pick up on, or the guys will talk about in the press conferences and stuff like that, is, how does the communication working in the back end? How well are the safeties talking to the corners? How are the linebackers talking to the safeties? How is all this communication happening in the back seven? And how well are they handling, like you said, those mixed coverages where, okay, hey, we're man this side and we're zoning up this side, and on this side we're slicing the slot receiver. We're going to double team in and out bracket the slot receiver. And then all of a sudden the slot receiver moves from one side to the other. How are they handling that transition, that communication of, okay, hey, now we're checking out of this slice into this coverage over here. We're going to do this thing separate, all this kind of stuff. We're now going to jump it from the free safety, and we're going to rotate the opposite corner back to the middle of the field. How are these guys handling all of that kind of stuff and all that communication in camp in a controlled environment before they then have to go to Cleveland in week one and play in Cleveland in a hostile environment with the dog pound and all that kind of stuff in a season that carries a lot of hope for the Browns. How are they going to handle that? And then when they go on the road to some of these other places, how are they going to handle all that communication on the road in hostile environments when it's loud, all that kind of stuff? Because that is the aspect that there is a lot of up and down dynamic that comes when you add all of these extra factors in. It creates some fragility almost in it, and that, like, if one guy doesn't get the check, you're toast. Like, if one guy doesn't get the check and the right play is called, strike up the band. It's time for the fight song because they're going to score a touchdown. But if you play it right, you're going to get tons and tons of stops and all that kind of stuff. It's going to be interesting to see how all that stuff plays out schematically and communication-wise, and how the players feel about it in camp and in practice, and then into the preseason and the games.
And for fans that are looking for kind of like a easy to identify differences between this defense, Zimmer's defense, and Dan Quinn's defense, I think one big one, especially from a secondary perspective, Cowboys were before a really big middle of the field closed defense, which means they're playing with a single high safety. Malik Hooker was playing as that free safety, that roamer. But you're going to see Zimmer presenting at least a lot more two high shells. I think you're going to see them present two high shells pre-snap for the vast majority of their plays, and then you'll see the funky rotations come out of there. I think you're going to be seeing, like, Donovan Wilson and Malik Hooker align deep, and and that's the thing about these two high difference between one high is a one high, the safety's a lot deeper than in two high coverages, two high shells. They're a lot more shallow, closer to the line of scrimmage, because they do have run responsibilities. They do have to run the alley. They do have to add in run support, because when you're playing too high, you're not a gap ahead. You're not a man ahead of the gap. You don't have a man ahead of the gap. You have to have a safety flowing whichever direction the play is. The other safety's got to be, playing the cut back, because that's really important against two high defenses.
That's that backside of safety responsibility I was talking about earlier. That's how you can check somebody is that backside safety in a quarter shell. But yeah, the depth of the safeties is interesting. Because, like you said, in a two deep, they're going to be somewhere like about 12 yards off the line of scrimmage at the snap, right?
10 to 12.
Yeah, 10 to 12, and then that in a single high, that deep safety is going to be 15 to 18, because he's got to get back sooner, because he's got now not quite the whole field, because you do have corners outside.
The hashes,
for the hashes, but then also a lot of times all the way out to close to the numbers as a single responsibility. You got to get deeper to give yourself that range, but when you're playing at 10 to 12, I'm really excited, because I specifically remember, the Mike Nolan 2020 year was like, that's one of those, it's like 2015, like we just take it, like shove it in a box somewhere and put it away. But the one aspect of that year that like really stood out, and it wound up getting this guy paid a lot of money and making him kind of a household name for Cowboys fans, is when you put Donovan Wilson 10 to 12 yards off the line of scrimmage and you let him play with instinct in that position, like the level of hurt that is coming for some of these players coming inside against the Cowboys, and the level of playmaking that comes with the ball in the air from him at that depth. Because that's one of the things that, like, early in his career, he got a ton of interceptions. Like in 2020, he had 2 or 3 interceptions and stuff like that. He's playing at that 10 to 12 yard depth at the start of the snap. and he would come down and still be a force player in the run and all this kind of stuff. But as Dan Quinn came along, they started, they basically had one deep safety, and the rest of the safeties were essentially second level players. They're 5 or 6 yards off the last drive. And so Donald made a bunch of plays in 2020 and 2021 as a free safety, as the guy who's either deep in the middle of the field or starting at that 10 to 12 yard depth and playing downhill where he can play with his eyes and go. And so he's one of the guys that I think, as long as he doesn't wind up in Mike Zimmer's doghouse, because you just never know who's going to wind up in Mike Zimmer's doghouse, right? As long as that doesn't happen, he's one of the guys that I think benefits the most from this scheme switch to Mike Zimmer and to these two high shells and stuff like that, because he's still going to be able to be an impact player near the line of scrimmage, but he's also going to get to show what he can do from a coverage standpoint in these zone coverages, passing routes off, jumping routes, and things like that. Because some of that 2020 film was nasty to watch for everybody else. But if you just watch Donald work in the run game and the pass game from that spot, it was just beautiful to watch this guy play in that sort of scheme. Because it's very similar, roll it all the way back to A&M. It's very similar to what they played at A&M when he was there. Mm-hmm. He played a 3 safety look, and he was the guy who a lot of times would wind up rotating as kind of the overhang at 10 to 12 yards. And he made a lot of plays that way too.
Yeah, I believe one of the most obnoxious talking points throughout this offseason since Zimmer was hired was the fact that they thought that Donovan Wilson wasn't a good fit. That was a big talking point for, I felt like, a couple months around the draft time when people were talking about adding safeties. Safety's a sneaky need. It's the way that I view the Cowboys personnel at safety and how it fits into a Zim scheme was just the complete opposite. I think Donovan Wilson is a perfect fit for what Zim likes to do on defense. And, I say this every time that Donovan Wilson comes up, but it's because it's so amazing. I have never seen a Cowboys safety play above their weight class as well as Donovan Wilson. I have
absolutely
on my Twitter, you just search Donovan Wilson and my name together, and you'll see clips of him taking on guards.
Oh yeah,
and not doing the the normal the Antoine Winfield where you slip the block and make the tackle. He's taking it on like a damn linebacker.
Exactly. He's coming from that. He's coming from that 10-yard depth and just blasting dudes at the point of attack.
That dude just has no regard for his body, or he does not care how big you are, how strong, how fast you are. He is going to throw his body at you, and we're going to see what happens.
Yes, absolutely.
And I just love watching him on. He's probably, outside of I'm a defensive line guy, so outside of the defensive line, there is no one on the defense that I would rather watch on a snap-by-snap basis than Donovan Wilson, and that's a safety. Safeties are usually boring.
Yeah.
Usually he's falling asleep.
Absolutely. Usually you're watching 30 plays to get one play worth of hey, the guy did something. But that's one, I think this is definitely for sure between the two of us, a Donovan Wilson appreciation podcast, YouTube show here, is that we have an appreciation for what he's doing snap by snap. Even if, and because of the stuff that you're talking about, because of the way that he plays with his body in the run game, he has this reputation as a guy who only plays down and who can only play in the box. And like I said, most of his snaps in the season that everybody considers to be his best season, which was 2020, his kind of coming out season, most of his snaps were as a free safety, as a deep safety. The guy can absolutely cover. He can cover. The coverage problems at safety did not come from the guy wearing number 6 the last 2 years. I will say that. And as we talk about both safeties, Malik Hooker is a guy who early in his career was he's got to be the true free safety. He's got to be the guy in the middle of the field. But as a little bit of that athleticism has been sucked away from him a little bit, and as he gets older and has been injured a little bit, now him playing, a deep half or a quarter and being able to, he's developed a lot coming downhill as a run player and as a sure tackler. I think they're really both fantastic fits because you really truly can show a 2 high shell, and either of these guys can rotate to the middle of the field deep, and either of these guys can rotate down and play the curl flat or play the hook curl in these zone responsibilities, or come down and handle 98% of tight ends in the league in man-to-man coverage for as long as they need to on a snap-by-snap basis. So, and they can both play that quarter's responsibility and come downhill and hit guys in the run game and in the pass game. So I think it's going to be a great fit at the safety spot. I think the corners are an interesting fit. It's going to be interesting to see, and I don't know if we've talked about this yet. How do you feel about DaRon Bland as an outside player for Zimmer?
I think he's going to be good there. I think his best spot is in the nickel, in the slot.
Mm-hmm.
I think he can be the preeminent slot in the NFL. I think that's his ceiling. I think he is that good. And not only because of his coverage ability, but people forget when you're in the slot, you have giant responsibilities.
You're a run player.
And DaRon Bland is another fantastic run defender for a slot corner. He's a fantastic tackler. He's not afraid to take on blocks. He's not afraid to slip blocks. He does a fantastic job there. And I think his ability is such a value add there. I think putting him outside, I don't want to say it wastes his potential, but it kind of just takes away a little bit from what makes him so great. That's why I was a big proponent of bringing Gilly back so that you can, even if you want to play, Bland in base on the outside and then slide him down to the slot. Now, I'm not sure you can't slide him down because you have Jordan Lewis there, who's he's, I would say, a good slot corner, but I think DaRon Bland is a considerably better slot corner there.
Yeah, I think I'm blocked by Jordan Lewis on Twitter, and I think when I found out I was blocked by him, I went back and looked like, what have I said about this guy to get blocked? I think the only thing before that I had said was that I thought he could be the best slot corner in the league. This was real early in his career that I said that, so I guess he thought it was a shot for me to say that he was a slot guy. But I think he is a very good quality starting level slot corner in the league.
And he makes plays. He'll have a couple games a year. We saw the Saints game against Alvin Kamara, really big.
Yep.
What was it? The Lions game last year, which was really big. He has these big time performances where he's honestly one of the primary reasons why your team was able to escape with a victory.
Yeah, absolutely. I do think that on a down by down basis in a ton of man coverage, there's some problems there, which is funny because he came in as this guy who could play a ton of man coverage. But in the slot against some of these receivers on a down-to-down consistent basis, and there's going to be some issues. But in a mixed coverage bag where you're playing some more quarters, playing some more cover three, stuff like that, giving them a chance to, I don't want to say take a play off, but not have to run not have to run back and forth motion and then run a deep crosser with a wide receiver every couple of plays. I think he's got a chance to be really good, but it does make the conversation interesting of the decision to bring back Jordan Lewis versus the decision to bring back Stephon Gilmore is that by bringing Jordan Lewis back, you pin DaRon Bland outside. Mm-hmm. By bringing Stephon Gilmore back, you give yourself a ton of flex because Gilly's been a guy that's gone into the slot at times throughout his career, especially in these star-type matchups and things like that, where he's gone inside if you want to play DaRon outside for certain matchups or if you want to flip him back. You can do all that kind of stuff with those two. That flexibility goes away a little bit whenever you talk about a pure, a Jordan Lewis, DaRon Bland tandem with Trevon Diggs as the primary corner for sure. Is that it takes away some of that coverage menu, some of that matchup menu that you might have with those two. And because I agree with you, I think DaRon is a fantastic inside player who, like you said, could be the best slot player in the league. But outside, he's a good outside corner. Inside, he's got a chance to be one of the best in the league. They seem to think the outside is more important and they'd rather him play outside. I don't know that I disagree with that, although I don't know that I do agree with it. It's just it seems to be their assertion based on their actions so far this year.
Yeah, totally agree. It's going to be
we'll see
how it plays out.
Yeah, we'll see if there's an outside corner that they have that Zim loves that maybe it's one of these guys that they've drafted the last couple of years that Zimmer was really high on that nobody knows about, that he's going to be the guy who comes in to play outside so that DaRon can move inside and stuff like that. Or if they want to get into dime and play with four cornerbacks, they've got a fourth corner that they want to bring in and move DaRon inside. We'll see how all that plays out, but that it's definitely something to watch in the secondary is they don't have a ton of depth in the secondary. It's pretty defined as these are the three guys. And because of who the three guys are, their roles are pretty well defined in terms of who's playing inside and who's playing outside. So it's going to be interesting to see how well all of that fits and how well DaRon Bland handles down to down being outside every single play for a full season, because this will be the first year he's done that. He spent a considerable amount of time in the slot each year before. Now this is going to be the first time he doesn't get to do that. So it's going to be interesting to see.
The worrisome part is going to come in is when the Cowboys sustain an injury, because it's coming. I mean, Jordan Lewis has dealt with a plethora of lower body injuries throughout his career. Trevon Diggs is also, when he didn't tear his ACL, he's also someone that would deal with like little sprains, little feet thing here and there. Deron Bland's been pretty healthy for the most part, it seems like, through his career, but you never know when something could pop up for him. So when those things happen, can these guys like Kalen Carson, can he step up? Can Eric Scott, is he someone who even fits into this defense, into a Zimmer defense? What about Israel Mukuamu? Where is he gonna fit in?
That may be my biggest question: is
can they moonlight in the slot? Can they be the the bigger slots, the guys that go against the bigger, wide, kind of wider body tight ends? The TJ Hawkinson type of tight ends who maybe Jordan Lewis can't really cover because he's a little bit too small,
or he's going to get worked by in the run game out there by those guys. Yeah, it's like Israel Mukuamu may be my favorite player on the Cowboys right now who doesn't play very much. Like, it's funny because in 2019, 2020, that guy was Donovan Wilson. Like, he doesn't get on the field, but every time he does, he makes a big play. And you're like, why isn't he playing more? And then all of a sudden injuries happen and he gets to play more. And you're like, well, this is why he should have been playing all the time. That's Israel Mukuamu right now to me. And like, I see, like, in my head a little bit like a dollar store after tax version of what the Ravens have done with Kyle Hamilton. Like this big long dude who plays in the slot, who can cover, who can blitz, who's a monster against the run out there because of his size. Like, you put Israel Mukuamu in that role, and I think you've got some. He's not Kyle Hamilton, right? He's not a first round pick, unanimous All-American, like one of the best players in the country. His year he came out, but he's a guy who has played corner. He has played safety. He's done them both at a really high level. And he just had, I think the fact that he's done them both has meant he hasn't done any of it consistently. So he hasn't had a spot. But maybe that's part of the plan for him is maybe he's one of the options as a reserve slot player.
Totally agree.
I definitely hope so.
Yeah,
it's going to be cool to see. Yeah.
Very interesting to see how it works out. He's one of those guys that, people always, I feel like they made the easy comparison because he was on the team, like, oh, he can be a J-Ron Curse. But I've always said he's more versatile than J-Ron Curse. He has a wider breadth of a skill set. He can cover receivers. He doesn't have to just be a tight end eraser type guy. I would say he's not as good against the run in the box as what J-Ron Curse was for the Cowboys defense, but I think that's something that he can improve to become. I don't think J-Ron Curse was so amazing there that Mukuamu couldn't develop into that kind of guy if he was put in that situation more often. But he's kind of been hurt by the fact that the Cowboys, even though they have had a lot of issues at cornerback the last few years, safety, their injury luck has been actually pretty dang good. So it's been really hard for him to find a spot so that he can shine as much as we think his talent suggests he should.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things about J-Ron Curse's role the last few years, he was essentially a linebacker. He was in the box at the second level essentially every snap.
When he was playing from depth, it was trouble.
It was trouble.
It was a problem.
So that role, you talk about, Israel Mukuamu could be J-Ron Curse. That role in the Cowboys defense doesn't exist anymore. That role now is DeMarvion Overshown playing weak side linebacker, or Damone Clark playing weak side linebacker, or somebody playing Sam linebacker. Like that role doesn't exist anymore. That role has been replaced by a linebacker. That's not a safety role anymore. And so, but there is that, like, say, hey, we're going to play these two shells and we're going to rotate somebody down, and that guy's going to wind up being sort of a slot player. If we wind up playing some bigger nickel type looks, is that how it looks? I think Israel fits that role way better than the other guy would have fit it had he still been here and had to been transitioned out of his old role into
100% agree.
Absolutely. All right, we are just about the hour mark here. We are at 1:00 Central Time. So that means the lunch hour is over, guys. So thanks so much for joining us. John, I can't tell you how much I appreciate you doing this with me, man. It's always a blast. We're going to get into some really, if we feel like this has been nerdy for the last couple of weeks or for the last couple of shows, once we get into the season and we get this tape pulled up and we start drawing on the screen, it's going to get real fun where we really start to talk about exactly what's going on under the hood with this Cowboys offense. We'll probably focus mostly on the offense, but we'll give John some defensive line play to look at too. But we want to share the wealth a little bit. But guys, thanks so much for joining us. We're super excited to get into the season. John's going to be at camp the first week of August. Is that right?
We're August 2nd through the 5th. If you're out there, come say hi.
There you go. So John will be in Oxnard the 2nd through the 5th of August. We'll get some content from him while he's here. We'll get some recaps from him when he gets back, all that kind of stuff. We're going to cover the whole season. It's going to be a blast. If you're a business owner that sucks at accounting, Silver Moon Financial, it's up there in the corner. That's my company. I can help you fix your accounting. I can help you make it so that you don't have to be scared to look at your accounting books anymore, so that you can make better decisions. Guys, thanks again so much. We're a little bit over the hour. You guys have a great day, and we will see you on Tuesday.